Today we're going to talk about whether or not saving in a 401k is enough to plan for your retirement. And as you might expect, the answer to these questions is usually it depends. The first thing I would mention is that typically when you're saving while you're working, you want to be targeting a savings amount of about 20 to 30% of your net income. So if you're funding 20% or 30% to your 401k and that's enough to cover that, then maybe it is enough to cover it. But there's some other factors that you want to be considering with this too. Whenever you're funding a 401k, typically most people are funding it with pre-tax dollars. So the thing to consider there is that every dollar that you fund into there, you're getting a tax benefit today, but in the future when you withdraw it, you're going to have to pay taxes on it. So we want to be thinking about, how can we structure this so that not all of the money that we're tapping into in retirement is taxable, to give us a little bit of flexibility on how we plan your income. The second thing to keep in mind is if you are planning on retiring early, prior to age 59 and a half, there are some limitations on how much you can actually pull out from a 401k or an IRA. So if one of your goals is to retire early, it's going to make sense to have some savings in a taxable account or a brokerage account that will allow you to tap into that to bridge the gap until age 59 and a half. As I mentioned before, one of the biggest mistakes I think people make going into retirement is they end up with a large 401k plan, 100% of which is taxable. And when you go and start creating that retirement income, if you need, let's say, $100,000 a year of retirement income, we're effectively committing to $100,000 a year of taxable income. And if we are able to save in a few different buckets, that allows us to mitigate some of that taxes and do some planning even in your retirement. So there's a couple other places that you can be putting funds. Number one, a brokerage account, which is effectively a taxable account. It's like a bank account that you invest in. The second place is a Roth 401k. So most people that have access to a 401k can fund Roth contributions. And what that means is that it's post-tax dollars being funded. But when you pull that money out in retirement, there's no taxes on it. In an ideal world, we would have roughly a third of your investments in taxable sources, like a brokerage account, a third of the investments in Roth funded where there's no taxes, and then you'd have a third of it in the pre-tax traditional kind of 401k. The other thing to kind of be considering with this is that if you do have other goals outside of retirement that you're saving for, it will likely make sense for you to have that money placed in an area that's a little more flexible. Because like I mentioned, you can't tap into the 401k until you're 59 and a half in most cases. The other piece of that, of course, is that all of that is taxable when you withdraw it. I think this is one of the things that Summit does really well is we work with our clients early. If you're in your 40s or 50s and you're planning for your retirement, what we're going to try and do is set up your plan so that you're saving into each of those buckets in an appropriate amount based on your goals, which will allow you to have a much easier retirement from a tax planning standpoint. Gives us a lot more flexibility and just make sure we don't put all of that in the 401k bucket. So thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you joining for a Financial Tip Friday, and we'll see you next week.